through just some introductions to start with and some suggestions, and then hand you over to Vidyamala Burch, who's going to give our talk this evening on mind and body, why we need mindfulness in physical health care. So perhaps we could ask you to start with perhaps introduce yourselves in the chat, perhaps just your name, where you're from, an organisation if applicable perhaps, and maybe one word to say how you're feeling this evening. That would be nice if you're happy to do that. It'd also be lovely if perhaps just inviting you to really listen deeply to the talk, maybe pick out themes, phrases or words that resonate with you as we hear the talk, and there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions towards the end of the event this evening. If you do have some questions, you can also put those in the chat and actually mark it question, and then put your question so we can pick them out then as we take a short break later on. So in terms of the agenda, I'll be handing over now to Vidyamala very shortly, and we'll do a 10-minute practice, and then Vidyamala's talk. We're going to take a short 5-minute break then at about 8 o'clock. Come back at about 8:05 then for the plenary and a question and answer session. So thanks for coming again, and I'll hand you over to Vidyamala for the practice.
Hi everybody, really lovely to see you all. It's very, very warm here in England. I hope it's warm there in Wales as well. And this is a great honour to be here to speak to you tonight about mindfulness and physical health care. I'm the founder of Breathworks, one of the founders of Breathworks, and we specialise in mindfulness-based pain management and then associated conditions such as long-term health conditions, fatigue, and as well as all the mental and emotional elements that come with physical difficulties, of course. So I'm just back from a 4-week retreat in a field near here where I had no electricity and no hot water, and I lived in a yurt, and I'm somewhat flummoxed by this modern world that we all live in now that I'm back. So do forgive me if I don't quite master the technical side of things tonight. I'm doing my best. I'm usually very good at these things, so it's quite interesting. I'm sure it will be fine. And the other thing is I do have a pain condition myself. I've got a spinal injury. So what I do is I stand up every 20 minutes or so to stretch my body. I've got a standing desk. And the invitation is for all of you to do what you need to do this evening to take care of your body. Yeah, I mean, human bodies are not designed to be slumped in front of a computer for an hour and a half. And most of us spend hours a day just slumped in a chair. So I really would invite you to move your body this evening. You can lie down, walk about, I don't mind what you do. And certainly when you see me standing up, you might think, oh gosh, yes, that would be nice. And you might like to stand up yourself. Okay, so we're going to begin with a practice, and I'll lead a body-based breath awareness practice, which is one of the practices that we teach at Breathworks, and it can be very helpful if you're living with physical discomfort to lessen the tension in the body and to invite the support of gravity. So you can give yourself up to the chair. Very often we sort of hold ourselves against gravity, and then we can drop into whole body breathing. And it would just be for about 10 minutes maximum, probably about 8 minutes now. Okay, so if you decide what position you'd like to take, and again, it's good to be very conscious about this. Think, well, am I in the most comfortable position? Am I in the most supportive condition? And if you'd like to move, then now's your moment to do so. And you can do the standing, walking, sitting, lying down, whichever you prefer. If you want to do walking, you could just do slow walking up and down the room as I guide through the meditation. Okay, so let's just settle into our position, whichever position we've chosen. And beginning to drop our awareness inside the body. And we can do this by feeling into the contact between the body and whatever it's resting upon, be that a chair, if we're sitting, the floor, maybe if we're standing or we're lying down. What's it like to yield the weight of the body up to this support? If you find it helpful, you could take a deep breath in. And then on the out breath, letting go and releasing. Do that a few times, breathing in. And then releasing, letting go. Allowing the out breath to slide all the way out to the end and the in breath to flow back in again in its own time. Sorry about my squeaky chair. So letting go of the day, letting go of whatever we've been doing, letting go of worries about the future. And let's see if we can arrive here and now in the present. And allowing your breathing to find its own natural rhythm. Now let's drop our awareness right down inside the legs. So being aware of the feet, lower legs, upper legs. And sensations might be strong and intense, even painful. Or sensations might be absent, where your legs might feel numb. It doesn't matter. The main thing is to inhabit the legs with awareness, however they're presenting themselves to your awareness right now. Seeing if you can inhabit the legs. So we're not looking in from the outside, but we're resting inside the legs. Coming up to the buttocks. If we're sitting, seeing if we can let the buttocks be soft so they're resting, yielding, receiving the support of the chair, resting in gravity. Lying down likewise. If you're standing or walking, just having a sense of the buttocks being soft. And allowing awareness to pour up into the whole torso. The back of the body and the front of the body, the sides. Allowing breathing to express itself in the whole torso. The opening phase on the in-breath, subsiding phase on the out-breath. In the back, in the belly, in the chest, the whole torso. I always like to get a sense of the volume of the torso increasing in all directions on the in-breath, subsiding on the out-breath. And this is effortless. We're not forcing or straining. We're allowing breathing to happen in the whole torso. Coming to the shoulders on either side of the torso. Maybe there's a sense of breathing expressing itself in the shoulders, a kind of opening on the in-breath, subsiding on the out-breath. If we're sitting or lying, allowing the hands to be supported on the body somehow, on the lap or on the legs if we're sitting, on the belly if we're lying, or maybe at the side of the body if we're lying down. It's up to you. If you're standing or walking, having the hands resting at the side of the body. And let's allow awareness to pour down through the shoulders, all the way down inside the arms to the tips of the fingers and the thumbs. Again, sensations might be intense, they might be absent in the arms, the hands, the fingers. What we're cultivating is awareness. Flowing back up through the arms, through the shoulders, up into the neck and the head. And let's just check the angle of the head. If we're sitting or standing or walking, looking for alignment where there's release through the base of the skull and yet openness in the throat. Maybe having the chin tucked in just a tiny bit. We're lying down, giving the weight of the head fully up to the pillow or the cushion. So the neck can be soft. And coming into the whole head, allowing the head to be full of awareness. And it's always interesting to experience the head as a limb of the body. So rather than seeing the head as separate from the body, it's a limb like the arms and the legs. So feeling any sensations in the head. And allowing our awareness to pour inside the face. Forehead, eyes, nose, cheeks, lips. Let the lips be soft, the tongue soft, and the mouth, the jaw soft. And I always like to imagine my brain becoming soft. It's just resting in its little cradle of bones inside the skull. And as the brain can feel very solid and heavy and a bit like a rock, just let it be soft. Apparently the brain is much more like tofu, someone told me the other day. Let it be soft and pliable inside the head, just resting. And now let's broaden to be aware of the whole body, the legs, torso, arms, neck, head. But experiencing it as a whole. And this thing we call the body is a flow of sensations, a flow of movements of breathing. Let's rest our awareness inside that flow for a few moments. And if we've got pain or discomfort anywhere in the body, including it within this flow of awareness with kindliness. Just let it be, let it flow, let it come, let it go. And as we bring the practice to a close, perhaps forming an intention to bring this quality of awareness with us into the session, so that while you're listening to the talk and looking at the slides, you're also aware of the body, also aware of breathing. As I said before, if you feel you need to move, then moving. What does your body need? What's it calling for? And just seeing if we can be present one moment at a time for this next period of time. When you're ready, you can open the eyes, just moving however you want to. I always want to stretch at the end of a sit. So again, just doing whatever's needed. Good. So now I'm going to share some slides, and I've got a little bit of a problem with my webcam. Well, obviously the webcam on my computer is fine, but I've got an external webcam I normally use, which means I can look in the right direction whilst I'm looking at my slides. But as I share my screen, you'll notice I'm looking in the wrong direction. And that's the way it's going to be, I'm afraid. So it doesn't matter, because you're going to be looking at the slides, not at me, but I'm just letting you know what's going on.
Vidyamala, we got presenter view.
Oh, phew. Okay, that's not very good, is it? Let me swap displays, seem to do something about that. Has that improved things?
Yeah, that's much better.
Good. Just learned a new thing there. Actually, if I look this way, am I looking in the right direction now? Okay, good. So it looks like it's all fine. Excellent. Okay, so I'm giving this talk on mind and the body, and particularly mindfulness and physical healthcare, based on my own experience and based on the work I've developed at Breathworks. And rather remarkably, this is actually a human nervous system. It's amazing, isn't it? Someone's been dissected, and that's what a human nervous system looks like. Now I can't get this moving. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about pain and evolution, why we experience pain, the importance of coming home to a body that hurts. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience, mindfulness, just touch on that very briefly, just to recap, how it helps with pain, cultivating balance, tiny bit about the autonomic nervous system, and then the 6 steps of our program, Mindfulness-Based Pain Management. And then this is sort of new thinking for me, this heals for whole life behavior change, where I'm increasingly thinking that mindfulness on its own is not enough. It needs to be integrated into other dimensions of behavior change, but I'll say more about that when we get there. And looking forwards, the areas of development that I think we all need to be thinking about in terms of mindfulness and physical healthcare. Okay, so as you know, the desire to escape pain is completely natural. It's a normal response to threat or danger. It's hardwired, and it enables us to survive as a species and individually. So it's a very, very important reaction that we have, that when something hurts, when it's acute pain, it's a sign of danger, and we take action. So of course, if you put your hand on a hot plate, you'll immediately get pain and you remove your hand, and that will protect you from danger. Yes, that's completely normal, completely healthy. If you've got chronic pain, the definition of chronic pain is daily pain, excuse me, for at least 3 months. So if you've got chronic pain, other long-term health conditions, then this avoidant response probably isn't going to work. It's just going to lead to more stress, more struggle, and more pain, because you have this pain as part of your daily experience. So a different kind of response is needed. I mean, many of us have experienced that top cartoon, haven't we? I can't stand it. And we know that, again, that's very natural, very normal, but the I can't stand it sort of emotional response to life leads to more suffering. You get more stress, struggle, and pain. So as we all know from mindfulness, and certainly this is true with the work we do at Breathworks, we need a different response, which is deeply counterintuitive, and that's to turn towards the pain. So rather than trying to avoid it all the time, we turn towards it, we investigate it, we develop kindliness towards it, we change our relationship with it. And it's very like a parent soothing a child. Yeah, the child is crying. It's completely natural for the parent to lift the child up, to stroke the child, and to soothe it. So we need to develop that kind of relationship to our own discomfort. So my experience, what's brought me to all this, is a bit of a long and sorry tale of back pain. So I first injured my spine in 1976 when I was 16 years old. I had 2 major surgeries the following year. I had that condition in the X-ray, which is called spondylolisthesis. And then I had a car accident in 1983 where I fractured another part of my spine, along with other injuries, and left me with partial paraplegia. So that's quite a lot. And it's meant that I've been able to use myself as the lab, as a laboratory, in terms of really deeply examining how can I get my mind to work with me rather than against me. That's increasingly how I'm describing one of the outcomes of mindfulness for all of us, get our minds working with us rather than against us. For many years, my mind absolutely worked against me. I didn't know how to cope with what was happening. So I went straight into denial and escapism. Very, very common with any kind of catastrophe. The first reaction is to run away, pretend it's not happening, push it away, and to try and escape. And that made my pain a lot worse, of course, because there's an enormous amount of tension trying to escape this body that I have. So trying to escape something that is intrinsically here is not a very good long-term strategy. In 1985, I was taught to meditate when I was in hospital in New Zealand, and I intuited that awareness training could potentially be life-changing. It was an intuition more than anything else. And I started to meditate then in 1985. Very, very gradually over the years, I've gone on a long, circuitous, sometimes tortuous journey of what I call coming home to the body, coming home to this body as it is, with all its imperfections, with its pain, so I can reside here with more peace. And these days I am relatively peaceful most of the time. So it's learning to live with pain rather than fighting it. That's the kind of message here. And it is a very profound turning about, because as I said earlier on, it's so deeply, deeply counterintuitive. And it's a huge relief. It's a huge relief when sort of laying down the weapons and turning towards this life that I have and learning how to flourish, learning how to make the most of what I've got. Yeah, I've got pain. That's very, very hard, but there's lots of things about my life that I can also really delight in and cherish. And what I've discovered through my own journey is it's resistance which is the problem. And this is also absolutely central to Buddhist teaching, which is where a lot of the mindfulness sort of methodology has come from. So the realization is that the suffering of pain is caused by resistance and resentment more than the actual painful sensations. This is a very, very important point. Yeah, we'll all have things in life where we have painful sensations. That's inevitable. And we can either make it worse by resisting and resenting, or we can learn to live with it with greater ease and grace. Now, my timer is going off, telling me it's time to stand up. So I'm going to just pause there. I'll just mute myself so I don't make a racket standing up. If anyone else wants to move, now's a good moment. And I'll just keep talking from standing up position now. That's better, yeah. Yeah, so mindfulness helps us to let go of the resistance. And this is, the longer I've been doing this work and practicing myself and teaching, the simpler it's become in a way. You know, realizing that these things seem so complicated when we're first learning them, but it's quite simple, the sort of theory that what we're trying to do is let go of this resistance. And that this applies to all of life. You can look at this in your own experience, that when we resist and fight things, generally speaking, it doesn't lead to ease. Whereas if we can acknowledge, yes, this is difficult, I'm finding this difficult, we have to be very realistic and honest with ourselves, but to let go of this extra layer of fighting, then generally things go better. So mindfulness, just to recap what it is, and there's this John Kabat-Zinn quote that's or definition or evocation, which is very widely used, a particular way of paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And sometimes that's summarized as attention, intention, and attitude, which I think is very, very good. Attention, intention, and attitude. This is a definition that I wrote in the book that I wrote, Living Well with Pain and Illness, which is a kind of behavioral definition. So live in the moment, notice what is happening, and make choices in how you respond to your experience rather than being driven by habitual reactions. Yes, that's a practical definition. So it's all about making choices, and we can only make choices if we're aware, if we know what's happening in each moment. So mindfulness helps by enabling us to turn towards the pain, the fatigue, the difficulty, whatever it might be, and we can then divide it into two components. There's what we call primary suffering, which is the basic unpleasant sensations or experience in any given moment. If we're not aware, we'll immediately pile resistance and resentment on top. It's so automatic. It's so deeply ingrained, the I don't want this reaction. And then we get all kinds of secondary suffering, which is the mental, emotional, and physical reactions. Yeah. And at Breathworks on our courses, we do enactments. And this is the cushion exercise. It's very, very powerful. So the person there's got the blue cushion, which is the basic unpleasant sensations, maybe painful sensations in the back. And then all the red cushions are the thoughts like, I can't stand it, it's ruined my life, I'll never have any friends. What if all the what ifs, what if I never get a decent night's sleep ever again? And all these things pile up. And then we teach people that they can let go of all those red cushions and then change their relationship with the blue cushion by being soothing and kindly. Secondary suffering, all these reactions, all the purple cushions. In my learning, I've become clear it tends to manifest in these two opposing poles of either overwhelm, which we call drowning, or denial, which is blocking. And I think we flip-flop between these two. So the overwhelm is catastrophizing, depression, and we tend to be overwhelmed by these sensations in the body. So we're kind of swamped by our bodily experience without perspective. Denial, on the other hand, we tend to be restless, controlling, and we're in our head. So you split off from the body. And if you look at your own experience, you'll probably find that when you've had difficulty, very often we block and block and block and deny, and then we collapse and we get overwhelmed. And then we crawl out from the overwhelm and we go back into denial again. Very, very human. There's no judgment. It's what we all do. And we've got different strategies. So if you find that you're blocked and denying an experience, it could be any experience actually, not just pain, then what we need to do is come closer. So you notice, I'm a bit numb, I'm a bit cut off, I don't know what's going on, feel a bit hard. Then use your awareness to explore what's going on. And how do I feel in my body? How's my breathing? You'll probably find you're holding your breath when you're in a denial state or a blocked state. So come closer, have more precise awareness. On the other hand, if you're overwhelmed, it's like all too much, you're just kind of all turned in, then what you need to do is broaden your awareness, get perspective, look out at the vistas, be aware of all the other things that are going on in your life other than the pain or the difficulty. And then the skill is to find balance. So mindfulness is very dynamic. I think this is another point I want to make. It's not a static, state. It's like we are dynamic creatures. So you notice you're tipping into denial. I notice that. Okay, I'll just come a bit closer. Getting a bit overwhelmed. I'll broaden, holding my breath. Okay, I'll release my breath. Getting stuck in my head. Okay, let me drop down into my body. And it's a bit like being the surfer. So mindfulness is an active, dynamic, responsive quality of awareness, not as a static state, but awareness as this, like the person on the surfboard. I've never surfed myself, but I've watched surfers, and it's very, very dynamic. They're following the wave and they're doing what they need to do to stay on the wave. So we're following, if you like, our experience, our embodied experience, or even our thoughts and our emotions. We're following those, we're aware of those, and we're continually sort of fine-tuning our responses to have a flexible, fluid, creative life. And what this brings us to as well is that life is fluid. This is a very, very important insight, very important moment in my own journey when I realized that pain wasn't a thing and it wasn't the enemy, because of course pain, like back pain, can feel really, really solid. Split off from it, turn into the enemy, not really feeling it, stuck in the head, alienated, and it's just this thing which is ruining my life. But by coming closer, investigating, exploring it, what is this actual experience? It's these sensations. It's not my whole back, it's just my lower back. And it's not exactly the same one moment to the next. It's continually changing. How interesting. So pain is not a thing. Pain is a label for a flow of experience. And yes, it's unpleasant. No one's denying that. But it's a label for an experience, a perception that's continually changing. And I like this image because the icicles and the water are exactly the same element, H2O. It's exactly the same thing. I'm using the word thing advisedly there. H2O, water. And when we solidify around experience, it can feel like those icicles sort of spiky, cold, hard, even dangerous, if you like. And when that melts, it becomes a flow. And we can have that shift in perception around pain and difficulty rather than it being all spiky and hard and difficult. Breathing, flowing, sensations changing. Get curious, get interested. That sensation, I thought it was painful, but it's tingling. That's pleasant. That's interesting. Breathing, that's pleasant. That's unpleasant. That's the pain. That's unpleasant. And it becomes very, very interesting, fluid, open, dynamic, receptive. And one holds life a lot more lightly. That's what happens when we start to have this shift in perception. And we realize as we get closer and closer to what's actually happening, that we're ever only experiencing the difficulty one moment at a time. And we're torturing ourselves sometimes with all the thoughts about the past, thoughts about the future, but they're all just created by the mind. The only thing we can actually experience is what's happening right now. And pain, one moment at a time, is very, very different from the story of pain that's going to go on forever. And in fact, it was the one moment at a time insight, if you like, that changed my life when I was taught to meditate when I was 25. It arrived like a kind of bolt of lightning, if you like, and I realized that I have only experienced my pain one moment at a time. And in a way, I've dedicated my whole life to understanding that more and more deeply because I knew it was true, but I didn't experience it yet. And so I've dedicated my life to investigating this remarkable sort of truth that life is happening now, and how can I open to this life right now without contracting around the pain. So what we get, of course, when we drop into the moment is we get vastness. So the moment, which can seem a pinpoint in time, so it might seem very sort of tiny conceptually, when you drop into present moment awareness with this kind of restful quality, this receptive quality, something extraordinary happens to time and it all opens out into something sort of vast and wonderful. And I really, really love this image because there's the kind of luminosity of it and there's the depth of it, the mystery of it. So we get vastness and wonder when we begin to go, in a way, go so far inside our moment by moment experience that it blooms into something quite different. So just to very briefly touch on the autonomic nervous system, this extraordinary image again. What we're doing with these kind of mindfulness practices of releasing around the resistance and dropping into something much more fluid and open is we are balancing the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is all the things that are outside our conscious control, things like respiration, sweating, heart rate, these kind of things. And when people are living with chronic pain, very often the sympathetic system is overactive. So the autonomic nervous system's got these two branches, the sympathetic, which is to do with action, and the parasympathetic, which is to do with rest, restoration, and calm. And ideally, they're both just ticking over like a nicely tuned engine. We've got access to both. But when people are living with chronic pain, very often the sympathetic system is sort of stuck on. So we're full of adrenaline and cortisol. I'm sure we all know what it's like to be adrenalized. It's highly unpleasant. It's kind of breath holding, resisting experience, feeling hectic. And this is quite common with chronic pain. And some of the latest thinking around chronic pain is that it's not, I mean, it is in the body, of course, but it's the brain and the nervous system has got into a state of sort of hypervigilance, hyperarousal, which means we feel pain more. So it can intensify the perception of pain when the sympathetic system is stuck on, and it's often associated with breath holding. And breath holding can immediately make pain worse. And I think actually, again, with my teaching, I think probably the majority of people have chronic breath holding patterns. So at Breathworks, we do education around breath awareness and how to have more whole body breathing, a bit like we did in that meditation at the beginning. So everything that we teach really at Breathworks, broadly speaking, is cultivating the parasympathetic system. And this releases endorphins and oxytocin. And of course, endorphins are our endogenous opiates, our natural pain relievers. So we're trying to help people get out of this sort of overactive sympathetic nervous system and to bring in the parasympathetic system more. And this gets boosted with whole body breathing and mindfulness. Things like the body scan, really, really good for bringing online the parasympathetic nervous system. So balancing the nervous system is very, very important. So just to touch on our program, so we've got an 8-week program, which is called Mindfulness-Based Pain Management. And it's got 6 steps, and it provides quite a complete path of training. And it's mindfulness and compassion. So the first step is helping people experience awareness. This idea that awareness is possible. Now, all of us, we're all interested in mindfulness, so we'll accept that, hopefully. But if you think back to before you became interested in mindfulness, before you start to practice, you might be shocked at how unaware you were. You know, if I think back to myself in my 20s, I didn't think I had any self-awareness really. So the idea that we can be aware of ourselves, of our thoughts, of our emotions, of the world around us, other people, in this kind of conscious, clear, lucid way, we shouldn't underestimate how remarkable that is. You know, again, I think as mindfulness teachers and practitioners, we can take it for granted, this quality of awareness, but to understand that you know, awareness itself is a truly remarkable thing. The fact that as human beings, we can be aware of our own thoughts, we can be aware of our own emotions, that is really incredible. So we teach, you know, we sort of teach this idea that this awareness, this present moment self-awareness is possible. On the basis of that, we very gently help people learn how to turn towards the unpleasant, how to come into relationship with the pain, the fatigue, whatever the difficulty is, that may well be ruining that person's life. And they're probably trapped in secondary suffering. So we do practices, we do a compassionate acceptance practice to very, very gently get curious about what's actually happening and how can I move towards that primary suffering with compassion, with kindliness, with a soothing quality. And again, it's bringing online the parasympathetic. And I always say, you know, one could do a perfectly good mindfulness course that ends there, but I wouldn't have been happy with that because, of course, there's much more to life than just the pain or the difficulty. So then the next step is very consciously and intentionally noticing pleasant things, seeking out pleasant things. There's always pleasant things in life. Even when I've had the most appalling pain, if I go on this adventure of seeking out the pleasant, I'll always find something. It might just be clean sheets on the bed. It might be the light coming in through the window. It might be the fact that my face is soft. Yeah, so it's a skill, a very, very important mindfulness skill to also seek out pleasant things and enjoy them. Yeah, so it's not just about changing our relationship with the unpleasant. Then we have a bigger container, which is where we hold the unpleasant and the pleasant in a broad awareness and see into its fluid and changing nature. So it's a kind of equanimity quality. And then on the basis of that, we realize, I often call it looking over the parapet of self. We sort of raise our gaze and look out and think, wow, there's 7 billion human beings just like me out there. So our self-awareness becomes the basis of empathy. Everybody has pain of one sort or another. Everybody has pleasure of one sort or another. So we can use what we're experiencing internally as this gateway to common humanity and empathy. Again, very, very important. And then the behavioral outcome of all those steps is choice, learning how to live with choice. So we're no longer a victim of our own mind or our pain or our body or whatever the difficulty is. We've turned this into an acronym, Be Aware, these 6 steps. I'll just run through this very quickly. So the first step is being aware of body, thoughts, and emotions. And the first 3 weeks of our program is investigating that. Second step is acceptance. We teach compassionate acceptance practice. Third step, waking up to wonder. And we teach a practice that we call the treasure of pleasure. And it's both these simple, small things like a cup of coffee, smelling a flower, music. And it's also, I'm jumping ahead of myself there. So it's those experiencing those simple pleasures. And then the next step is arising and passing. So it's living with flow. So we've got the pleasant, the unpleasant, and we're able to hold it in this much, much bigger perspective. And we're also able to, look up at the stars at night and be awed. So I think awe is a very, very interesting emotion. And when your life is all kind of tight and narrow and I hate my pain, there's no awe in your life. But as we gradually come closer and then open out, we can let in wonder and awe. Relating, looking over the parapet of self, and then engaging with all of life. Yeah, I love that photo, that little boy, so happy. So that's the Be Aware acronym for the 6-step process. So what I want to move on now to behavior change. So this is something I'm finding very, very interesting to reflect on and wanting to bring more into breathworks, actually. So how do we get people to change all the dimensions of their life? Not just the mind. Obviously, the mind is very important. And there's this paper, Mindfulness Training Enhances Self-Regulation and Facilitates Health Behavior Change for Primary Care Patients. So that's an article you could look up if you want. And I can share all these slides afterwards. So one element is we've got mindfulness in daily life in our 8-week program. And this is helping people learn how to manage the activities of daily life with more balance. And interestingly, the acronym here is MIDDLE, which is helpful because it's finding the middle way between overdoing it and crashing. So the overdoing it and crashing is called boom and bust in clinical settings. So it's the overactivity cycle and the underactivity cycle. So you have a good day, you do loads of things, your pain flares up, so you decrease your activity, leading to underactivity. You crash, maybe you go to bed for a couple of days. You eventually start to feel better, so you do more to try to make up for lost time. So you've gone to bed for a couple of days, your emails have all piled up, your house is a mess, you haven't been shopping, you start to feel a bit better, you do all those things, even with even more intensity, overactivity, your pain flares up, and then you crash again. And this is a very, very common pattern for people living with long-term health conditions. And it's true of long COVID as well. I'll say a bit more about long COVID later. But this pattern is part of the long COVID recovery plan as well, how to get out of this. So one of the little slogans is take a break before you break. So keeping a little bit of energy back, having a break, and then going back to activity. We've got quite a complex pacing module in our 8-week program. It takes about 3 weeks. You keep diary of all of your activities, and eventually you start to use a timer. So that's what I've done tonight. I know that if I sit for about 20 minutes or so, I can manage that without having a flare up. Timer goes off, stand up. And now, in fact, I'm thinking it's time to sit down again. So I'm going to sit down again. So this is pacing in action. And it's very, very important. And I often say to people that this has changed my life more than mindfulness. Learning how to manage my behavior in terms of overdoing it and crashing, bringing management of my pain into my daily activities has been, or certainly as important as mindfulness, because if you meditate for 30 minutes a day, there's a lot of minutes of the day when you're not meditating, when you can make your pain worse through your behavior. So it's very, very important. So I'm just going to mute myself while I pull my desk down. I hope you all moved then as well. Okay. So pacing's good. Pacing's absolutely essential. But I've been increasingly thinking even that's not enough. So this is something I'm working on at the moment. I'm going to workshop with our community, is this HEALS idea. So I think diet, nutrition, these things are very important. And I'm not talking about any special diet necessarily, but if your diet's very poor and you learn mindfulness, it will be helpful. But the fact that your diet's very poor, that will be affecting your energy, be affecting your mind. So just basic things like, eating as healthily as possible. Of course, there's some communities that will find this more difficult for poverty reasons and so on. But I think there's still the principle of being as aware of what we put into our bodies as possible within our circumstances. So it's another area of awareness. And then exercise. How do we move our bodies? And there's stretching, resistance, and cardio. And even if one's ill, they're still learning, how can I be working on these domains within my capacity? So for example, I do stretching every day and I go swimming. And when I go back to the gym, I will start doing some very, very gentle weights for resistance training. And when I do those things, I feel so much better. The only caveat here is for chronic fatigue and long COVID, there's quite a lot of controversy around exercise, as some of you will know. Graded exercise has been one of the sort of pillars of chronic fatigue management, and it's quite controversial. So it's in a way, how do you work with what you've got with awareness, staying as fit and strong as you can within your health limits? And then awareness is the foundation. So I see awareness as like the keystone. We can only make choices around our eating if we're aware. We can only make choices around how we move if we're aware. So awareness is the foundation of this whole life health. And then love and connection. There's evidence that feeling connected is really good for our health, and also connecting with nature. So obviously this is included in our program already. But it's very interesting, the evidence that as human beings, we are built for connection, we're wired for connection. And when we feel connected, it's good for our health. And there's lots of evidence around nature. Being in nature is good for your health. And again, there's lots of ways you can do that. You don't have to go to a national park. You could just get some pot plants in your house. You can make a point of looking out the window at the trees. But it's valuing that connection with the living world around us. And then sleep is another interesting area. Like you can be very mindful. You can have your daily meditation practice, take your phone to bed and be on the internet till 3 a.m. That's going to be really bad for your pain and really bad for your health. So sleep hygiene, I think, is very, very important. Behavior change around sleep. So these are areas that I'm interested in, like how do we bring these into mindfulness programs and communicate them in a way that's going to be effective for people. As I said, awareness is the keystone to these pillars of behavior change. Okay, so I'm just going to finish now with other things that I'm thinking about in terms of healthcare, physical healthcare, and mindfulness. What are the things that we need to be thinking about? And I think a big thing is accessibility and reach. As many of us will know, mindfulness has come into our society around about 2000 in the UK, and it's been predominantly white middle class, not exclusively, and of course it's increasing, being brought into organizations and NHS and so on, which is brilliant. But I think accessibility and reach is an ongoing issue for all of us who are involved in mindfulness. You know, how do we get it out there? Because we know it's really helpful. The evidence is there now. We know that mindfulness is effective. So online, yeah. So we do almost everything online now at Breathworks, and fortuitously, we'd moved a lot of it online. All of our teacher training we moved online just before the pandemic, so we were very well placed to then be able to respond. And we've made a decision to keep our teacher training online, even when things go back to face-to-face, certainly for the time being. We managed to have global reach, have people from different countries able to join us, but also people with health conditions. Online can be really, really good because you don't have to go somewhere and deal with conditions that might not be very good for you, like uncomfortable beds in a residential situation and so on. So it definitely increases accessibility for people with pain and long-term conditions. So for example, this year, we're running 15 mindfulness for health courses and 14 mindfulness for stress courses. And we just keep on having to put on new ones. Now, prior to going online, when most of our courses were face-to-face, we found the mindfulness for health courses very difficult to fill because people who really needed it weren't well enough to get to a venue. So I find this very interesting that we've now got more health courses going. So people are hearing about us who've got health conditions, and we've made the whole program, our platform, very, very user-friendly. And you can do it in your own pace and all those kind of things. Some of the courses you can do in your own pace. Yeah, so I think accessibility and reach is a very, very big issue for all of us. And then, of course, cost. For a lot of mindfulness courses, up till now, it's been essentially kind of private healthcare. So we started doing some free resources last year for the pandemic. I was in New Zealand actually when we flew back on the 16th of March last year, and we were due to be coming back later, but it was becoming apparent that this thing has come into our world and all the borders were closing. So me and Sona, my partner, we thought, gosh, we better get back to England. And we basically spent the flight writing these resources for the pandemic. It was actually a very good way to spend a long haul flight. In New Zealand, we thought, wow, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it, to come up with some free resources for, initially it was for self-care, people who are stuck at home. And then as the whole key worker, it became apparent that, key workers were under incredible stress and vulnerability, the exposure to the virus. We came up with some free resources for key workers, and that's reached 10,000 people over the last year. So it's very, really, really good to see. And we're now offering bursaries. So we're now in a financial position at Breathworks where we can do this. So we're offering up to 50% of the fee for teacher training and up to 100% of the fee for courses. So this is really, really good to see. So it's no longer, for me, for many, many years, actually, I started 20 years ago, and probably for the last 10 years, accessibility has been bugging me. How can we make this more widely accessible to people who really need it? That's been a major kind of concern of mine, and we're beginning to get there with the free resources and the bursaries. And then literacy, this is another really important area, of course. And everything, but particularly with COVID and long COVID, we've all seen the stats where it's people of lower socioeconomic circumstances who are more vulnerable, the very people who need it. They're not going to be able to read my books probably. We've been doing some work on a long COVID app, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And the literacy level we're aiming for is 12 years old. That's what the NHS is working with. So that's interesting. Anyway, we've got this course called Take Back Your Life, which has been developed by one of our teachers who's a TEFL teacher and very, very creative. It's a 5-week program. It's been rolled out on Tower Hamlets very successfully. And this lovely woman, Dorita, saying, I used to think I'm the only one with pain and I feel a bit ashamed. Now I realize I'm not the only one who suffers with pain. There's a connection with others. I feel okay walking with my stick now. Before I wanted to hide it somewhere so people wouldn't judge me. I can laugh about that now. I'm not alone. And that's so moving. So I'm so delighted with this program that Tish has developed. And we've just got a grant from the Manchester City Council COVID Impact Fund, partnership with Disabled Living, who we've worked with before. And 100 people are going to be offered an introduction and 48 people are going to be offered the full course. And it's particularly aimed at the disabled and BAME communities. So again, this is really beginning to make some impact in terms of reach and diversity. Long COVID, as I've just touched on that, I've developed some mindfulness content for a long COVID app via the eHealth unit at UCL. And what's interesting here is all our work up till now has been mindfulness for long-term conditions, for people who've got a condition that's probably not going to get better, chronic pain, arthritis, heart disease, cancer, these kind of things. And I've got a 10-day audio program. So I provided that first when we got into discussion with the eHealth unit, and I said, I've got some material, I can send it to you. And they put it out to the patients, and the patients were horrified. It was quite interesting, this feedback. They were horrified because the narrative around long COVID apparently is still a recovery. People are being told, you know, it might take a long time, but if you do all these things, you will recover from long COVID. So then that's given me an opportunity to develop resources for mindfulness for recovery, which we've not done before. You know, mindfulness for rehab. And that's been a very, very interesting project with them. And, you know, the material is basically the same, but the language is different. So rather than accepting what you can't change, what's going to be here for, well, in case of cancer, you know, that's obviously not recovery necessarily. But this is for people who've been hit by something absolutely overwhelming and devastating. No one knows anything about it, but the patient journey is still oriented towards recovery. Now, you know, let's see in a couple of years whether that's still the case, but that's the case at the moment. So the app is already used by 15 NHS trusts and it's expanding. There's lots of other material on the app already around diet, exercise, anxiety, and so on. But I've provided the mindfulness content, and that's going live in September. And it's been really great learning for me and our team around literacy and accessibility, working with this team. Like, how do you prepare resources for a 12-year-old reading age? Brilliant, really, really helpful. And also getting the feedback around they don't want that it wasn't appropriate to have mindfulness for long-term conditions working with the long COVID population. Had to be mindfulness for recovery. Really, really interesting. And then, of course, diversity in terms of people of color. This is another big issue for the mindfulness community. So we've got 5 POC interns being supported to join our teaching team, and they've got their own action learning group facilitated by one of our POC teachers. So that's really good. So we're trying to sort of get more diversity in the team because, of course, then that will affect the people that we teach. And if you see people like you in the teacher, that's very, very important. And then finally, we've got an online community. This is, again, very, very dear to my heart. You know, how do we actually create community that's accessible for people who are living with long-term conditions? So we're using a platform called Mighty Networks. It's really, really good. And we've made it free now. Initially, you had to pay a sub, but now it's free with the option to donate. And we've got 2,000 members just in a few months, rapidly expanding. So we've got groups, things like mindfulness and gynecological conditions. That's a new group we've got. Teachers and trainers, Breathworks book group, champions training group. That's a course that Vidyamala leads for us. Events, we can put all our events there. Community practice sessions, meditation support clinic, these kind of things, weekend retreats. And then we've got topics. So poetry, public events, guided recordings, trauma sensitive mindfulness, practicing with and managing pain. Yeah, so it's really, again, people can do all this at home. They don't have to go anywhere. It's diverse, it's broad. We're making sure there's depth, because that's always the issue with these things. There's just going to be a whole lot of superficial stuff, but no, we're making sure there's depth. And we'll see what happens with this. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this, and we can have courses on it and so on. And then research. So we're continually evaluating our program. As you'll all know, this is very, very important. And a recent project, for example, there's now a proposal into the National Institutes of Health in the USA for a major study based on a pilot that was done recently using our Mindfulness for Health program that showed changes in EEG and ERP measures of self-regulation and inhibitory control, and also changes in the endocrine measures pre and post MBPM regarding inflammation and the hormones that regulate pain perception. So we've done lots and lots of self-report questionnaires, and we've got a couple of EEG studies done, but this is really interesting because this is also looking at the endocrine measures. We've recently completed an impact summary report for commissioners, and we're in positive discussions for Mindfulness for Health to be funded via personal health budget. So again, it's this accessibility. How do you get it so that GPs are prescribing it? So in positive discussions around that. You can find out more about that here. Horrible long links, but when you get the PowerPoint, you can just click on those. Good. So those are the websites, Breathwork's website and my own website. And I'll leave it there. And I've more or less stuck to time, amazingly. Good.
That was wonderful. Thanks very much, Vidyamala. I know we did plan to have a short break, and I know there's I've been checking the chat to see if any questions have gone in there yet. So do you think, I think that might be an idea, is we can have a stretch, we can all perhaps stretch our legs and have a stretch of the body, or wherever it might be that we want to stretch, and just thinking about what was suggested earlier, just noticing perhaps what resonated with us, and maybe if we've got a question or a comment that we'd like to make, we can either drop it in the chat when we come back. Should we say in about 3-4 minutes time? So that'll be what, it'll be 9 minutes past 8, I think. So if we come back about then, and then we'll either take questions from the chat, or if we do a hand raise, perhaps we could do it that way as well, and take questions from guests that way as well. So thank you.
I think the kind of boomy busty thing, we probably can all find elements of that if we look into our behavior. Yeah, I mean, some people it's more than others, depending on our temperament. And we might do it more physically, we might do it more emotionally. But I think that principle of sort of pushing the envelope and then having a reaction to that is very, very human. And so if we accept that's kind of normal, then how can I modify that so that my life can become more sustainable and more pleasurable? I think that's really important.
I see there's a second comment that's been added on, and a third as well. I'm just looking to see if there's any questions in the comments there. But if people do have a question, we could also raise a hand. And if you don't know how to do that, I think it's in reactions at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, and then you'll see raise hand that comes up. So if you'd like to ask a question out loud as well, then please raise a hand too.
So I could just comment on Linda's said about working with young people with chronic pain, ages 13, 14. We do have some teachers that work with adolescents. So, obviously these young people might not want to be in a group with a whole lot of old people. I don't know. So they might want a teacher who's really sensitive to how do you work with adolescents. So if you wanted, you could email me Vidyamala at breathworks.co.uk, and I can hook you up with some of these people who work with teenagers who are also breathworks teachers. And one woman's really amazing, and she's also got her own long-term pain condition, so she'd be really empathetic and sensitive.
And then there's a question, I think, from Natalie, saying thank you, really insightful. I would love to hear more about the relationship between awareness and pacing. I've really needed my mindfulness on a daily basis to help me pace and avoid the boom and bust.
Well, I think the interesting thing about awareness and pacing is, I remember talking to someone years ago who was a mindfulness teacher doing a completely different program. And she said, we'd never teach pacing the way you do, because when you're mindful, if you're mindful, you know when to take a break and you know how to change your behavior. And I thought, wow, okay. That's not my experience, because we get swept away by things. So we teach the pacing, and like I use a timer on my watch, and in principle, you could think, well, you shouldn't need to do that. You should be so mindful that you just know, when your pain's getting a bit worse and you need to move. But I get caught up in things. Of course I do. And tonight's a very good example. I'm giving a presentation. Yes, I am aware of myself, but I'm not kind of watching my pain in order to know when I need to move. I'm engaging with you guys, and I'm engaging with the content, and having a timer that goes off on my watch. That's an external reminder. That's really, really helpful. Because it can seem, from a theoretical point of view, using sort of an external prompt can seem not very mindful. But we don't want people kind of pain watching all the time. We don't want people becoming so kind of hypervigilant around their pain. Like, oh, do I need to have a break now? Do I need to move? That's not what we're trying to encourage. We want people to have a life. But we want people to actually notice when the timer goes off, and then to take action. Because there's lots of people that just ignore it and throw it across the room. Or, a number of times a timer's gone off and I've not even noticed it. So the mindfulness practice is to notice these things with the overall intention, I want to manage my situation as well as I can. But it's very, very interesting, that we're not encouraging a sort of hypervigilant pain watching. We're encouraging having a life, and the mindfulness is a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a great believer in external prompts. Yeah.
Just to say, Sarah's just made a comment, and I guess asked as well a question. I wonder about our experience of lockdown in the pandemic, and do you feel the impact had a relationship to the chronic pain experience, and that really needed something about really needing the outdoor broad view, and then when I had chronic fatigue, the trigger was so quick it took a long time to tune in quickly enough to prevent the relapse.
So I think, obviously the pandemic's been a truly extraordinary time for all of us, and I think it's been mixed. Speaking for myself, it was a relief to be locked down, because I wasn't racing all over the world, trying to be helpful. And often, looking back, often in a state of strain, and discovering that I could do everything from my garage online and reach more people that's been life-changing. And the mindful discipline now is not to go back to the way I was before. And I think a lot of people I've talked to with chronic pain it's been like we've all just hit the pause button. And if you're living with a lot of strain, that has been a relief for some people. And then, of course, there's some people who feel completely trapped, and then there's nothing to distract, and they're just overwhelmed by their pain. So it's varied. It's varied. But quite a lot of people in our community they've got a lot of anxiety about going back to the way things were, because in a way, life's also been a bit more controlled. And if you're living with a health condition, sometimes your body can feel so out of control. So one thing that can happen is and I include myself in this, we become a bit more controlling of our environment, sometimes in a good way and sometimes in not such a good way. Ask my partner and he'll have a perspective on that. But if you can exercise that skillfully, you know, I think that a lot of our community are frightened of just going back to this crazy life and being exhausted and in that boom and bust thing all the time. Yeah. And then you said when you had chronic fatigue, the trigger was so quick. Yeah, exactly. And so if you'd when you had chronic fatigue, if you'd been using a timer that you sort of worked out what was your capacity, and you were using a timer to help you moderate that, would that have been helpful, do you think? You could just unmute yourself probably.
Yeah, no, because it wasn't set. So it was so variable that I had to look out for it to know when it was going to happen.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
So having an external thing, I tried that and just didn't.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I think we also have to be very, very forgiving of ourselves when we're living with pain and long-term conditions. And if you're teaching people with pain and long-term conditions, I showed you that image of the cushions, that you got the cushion of the primary pain and you got all the secondary cushions. And we get people to tip off the secondary cushions and to feel what it's like to let go of the burden of all those reactions. But I always say that the lived experience is you notice the cushions are piling up, and in the noticing, you let them go. And then before you know it, they're there again, and you let them go and they pile up. So the lived experience is, of course, we're going to resist and resent and react, but it's catching it earlier and earlier and earlier. And also just being very sort of compassionate. Like, it's really hard to live with long-term pain or a long-term health condition. It's really hard to live with long COVID. These things that they're difficult conditions, and we will, no one leads their life perfectly. We'll all have bumps in the road and overdo it and crash, but it's how do you, like the image of the surfboard, so how do you dynamically just keep on coming back to your center when you've fallen off? Maybe that's mixed metaphor there, because you don't actually want to, sorry.
Something I really loved about what you said, about it being dynamic, and, and it isn't about keeping in one place or keeping him, in balance all the time. Surfers fall off their boards, don't they?
Yeah, I do.
And, so it's okay. It's, it's all part of what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, there's always another wave for a surfer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always there's always another chance in the next moment. If you completely blown it in this moment, don't torture yourself, just pick yourself up, and another chance is coming along, another wave's coming along, get back on your board. Yeah. I mean, again, that's not a great metaphor, people with chronic pain who can't surf, but the principle's clear. Okay, so what else we got here?
Question from Mike there, yeah. Thanking you for the presentation, and then just wondering about the difference between Breathwork's approach and MBCT, MBSR, and then a kind of a second part, which what did you find the most useful to you when experiencing approaching difficulty that might be shared with clients that are also in that place?
In that place of difficulty.
Mm.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'll answer the first bit first. This is quite an interesting accident of history. So I learned to meditate in a Buddhist context, Triratna, which is Buddhist movement, where I was taught to alternate mindfulness one day and metta bhavana the next day. And metta bhavana is a loving kindness practice, so it's a compassion practice. So I was taught to have a sort of balanced approach to mind training. I need both mindfulness and I need compassion, kindness, yeah. And then I came across the work of John Kabat-Zinn, which I found really thrilling and exciting. Like when I read Full Catastrophe Living, I thought, wow, this is my Bible. I went on a training with him, I went on a short course with him at Bangor. But at that point, you could not train an MBSR in the UK. So I would have had to go to America to do an internship for 3 months. That was the only way you could train an MBSR. I couldn't afford that, I had no money, and I couldn't do it with my health the way it was. So then I thought, well, I have to come up with my own program, because I knew that I had something to offer. I knew that it worked, and I really wanted to share that with others. So I thought, well, I can't just do MBSR because that would be unethical. because I would need to be properly trained in that. So then I thought, well, okay, what is it that's really worked for me? So it's not like I developed something in opposition to MBSR. I was very sympathetic to MBSR, but I just couldn't do it myself. So I thought I've got to, you know, cut something similar, but something different enough that I'm not sort of breaching the integrity of the MBSR training pathway, because I couldn't do it. So then I realized, well, okay, I need to bring compassion in, because that had been really important for me. So half of our program is mindfulness and half of it is compassion. And I feel very, very committed to that. Very committed to that. And I know it's effective. And then the other big difference is the pacing. We've got this very detailed mindfulness in daily life module. As I said, you do it over 3 weeks. And that's been very important. And I realized that being mindful of cleaning my teeth or eating my food, that was not going to be specific enough to change my behavior, because I'm a massive boomer. You know, I just really push myself and then have a huge crash. And I knew that I needed something very detailed and very precise, almost prescriptive, you know, around the timer to help me. So that's the difference. And then the other difference is our approach to movement. Because MBSR then, I'm not sure what it's like now, but MBSR then was quite full on yoga. And I knew that for the cohort that I was working with, that wouldn't be appropriate. And we've now got, I think, a very good mindful movement module, which I increasingly see as moving meditation. So the main emphasis is on awareness as you move, and then you can take that into all the movements of daily life. And if people, you know, I recommend people go to physios and yoga teachers and stuff for the more rehab aspect, because it's very difficult to do a sort of rehab aspect that's generic with the community that we work with, because you might have someone with non-specific low back pain who really needs to move more in a class, with someone with secondary bone cancer who absolutely should not be doing spinal twists in the class. So we've worked on it a lot. We tried Qigong, we do a bit of that. And then I've worked with an amazing yoga teacher who's also a somatic movement expert. And we've come up with this quite gentle, we are helping people be more confident to move, but it's very safe. But I think, I mean, I'm not completely up to date with what MBSR and MBCT do with movement these days, but I think it's much broader than the full-on yoga that John Kabat-Zinn used to do, I think, isn't it? But back in the 2000s, I thought, well, I can't teach that in my program. And I'm into yoga, so it's not that I don't believe in it, but it was, you know, some of the movements that he was teaching were not good for me with my back. But I appreciate where he's coming from about extending. But yeah, it's moved more to how do I inhabit my body as I move, and then how can I take that learning into the movements of daily life. And that's been a very good training for people. And then what was the other thing? Most useful, experiencing difficulty. Okay, so I've got another little slogan. When in doubt, breathe out. Because when we're experiencing difficulty, we do loads of breath holding. So that's just a great little saying you can share with people. When in doubt, breathe out. Yeah, and there's that. I'll quickly show you the fist exercise. This is really, really quick, and you can use this with clients and people. So make a fist with one hand. And what's happened to your breathing? Yeah, as soon as you make the fist, breath holding. So the fist here represents difficulty. And you're tensing around the difficulty and you're holding your breath. And now imagine directing your breathing into the fist. And what does the fist want to do? It wants to open, yeah. So that's a fantastic little takeaway you can use with people who are struggling. The fist exercise, and when in doubt, breathe out.
Thank you, Vidyamala. I'm just aware of the time, and time's gone really quickly, as it inevitably does when you're enjoying yourself. And sort of, so I see there was one last question. I think it was, I don't know if it's one that I've got time to cover. I was just thanking you for the excellent presentation. and just touching on kind of different personalities, I think, and kind of whether there's different ways of approaching courses with gender, male, female. I don't know if there's time to answer that particular question.
Yeah, it's a really big question.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
And I think the whole mindfulness field, it's the jury's out. I mean, still way more women are attracted to mindfulness than men. So there's a big question, why is that? And how can we help men be attracted to mindfulness, because it helps everybody. So I think that's someone will figure it out at some point, but none of us have quite figured it out yet, I don't think. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if is that your experience in Wales? The same thing, that it's more women than men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, I really hope somebody does figure it out, because I really want this whole thing of training the mind. It's totally life-changing. Yeah. I mean, it might be something I sometimes wonder about is a more sort of warrior attitude. I mean, I'm leading a weekend retreat this weekend about becoming a compassionate warrior. And that really appeals to me. It's a kind of strength. And I think sometimes mindfulness is presented as quite soft, because it is soft, you know, because we're softening resistance and we're sort of yielding and we're letting go. But out of that comes incredible power and strength. And I think maybe we don't articulate that enough sometimes. Yeah. So
there's lots of thank yous in the comments now, and so I'll add to that and just say thanks very much for coming this evening, and your presentation, and also for answering the questions that were asked as well. And it was lovely to meet you and to listen to your talk.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't know, I'll send the presentation to somebody who will send it to the rest of you, no doubt.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much for that. We'll find some way of making it accessible anyway. And I've just got a few closing remarks really around events that are up and coming. I think Liz perhaps wants to say something. She's got a hand up now. So
it was accident. That was an accident, but I'll say
okay, that's all right. So just to say, our kind of next event will be, I think that we're doing a Welsh language event actually in October, I believe, 20th of October. And we're also doing another event in November, which is likely to be around the subject of health and some of the things that are going on within health and the NHS in Wales. So just to mention those two things, and I do believe, I know that in the past we've definitely mentioned, as a charitable organisation, we do survive via donations and so on and so forth. So Vidyamala, would you like to make a comment about how people could access that donate button if they want to?
Yes, so if you go to mindfulness-wales.org, there's a donate button there. And, you know, we want to make these events free. No one gets paid, but obviously, like every organisation, we do need, you know, help and support to manage. So, yeah, please bear us in mind.
Excellent. So that's it for this evening, and thanks again everybody for coming. Lovely to see so many faces here again, and we'll look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob.
Good. So there's still a few people on the screen, but I think it's possible that they have, they're not there. I could remove them. So
Yes.
if you're hearing this, please don't take offense if I remove you now. Okay. Sophia. Sophia is our friend. She's a breathworks trainee, and she's an expert in sleep.
Oh, is she?
Psychologist, yeah.
That's really good to know. Yeah.
You're still recording, Vishwapani.
Okay.